welcome to another Witchy book review video, and today I'm going to be reviewing Burn a Black Candle, an Italian-American grimoire by D. Norman, and this book was very kindly sent to me by the publisher Watkins in exchange for this review, and the book comes out on the 13th of September, so I am actually quite early with my book review for this one, which makes a change for me because I'm usually late, but I am reading this book, or I did read this book, as part of my summer reading challenge, so it meant that I got it read, I got it reviewed, and now here is the review for you guys as well, so that you can decide whether this book is something you want to check out. Let's get straight on to the review then. D. Norman grew up in her family's Italian-American magical tradition. She currently lives in Tennessee with her family, and throughout the past 20 years she has created and presented workshops on tarot, Lenormand and other practical magic topics. She has been a professional card reader since 1997, reading for clients around the world. And impressively, Dee has been a high priestess for 3 teaching covens and created the Occult Observatory. So, little information about the book then. So this copy that I have here is actually an advanced reader's copy, so it's not the final copy of the book that will be published and released. So it may vary slightly to the final book that's released. I think from what I've noticed, the only main difference at the moment is the cover, which this one is sort of a bluey green colour, and I think it's purple in the final sort of edition of it, which I really love the final version because the purple is really nice. But yeah, so most of it will probably be exactly the same on the inside in terms of content and things. So again, the blurb, I'm not sure if they're going to change that or anything, but I'm just going to read you a little bit of the blurb of what it says on here, so you've got a little bit more idea about the book. Discover the previously unwritten secrets of Italian folklore tradition passed down from generation to generation. This spellbook provides easy, step-by-step introduction to the basics of authentic Italian-American magical practice. Discover how to run a magical household, including creating a family altar and connecting with your ancestors. Enhance your well-being for self and family through Buona Fortuna. Perform transformative candle magic. Diagnose, cure and ward away Malocchio, or the evil eye. Develop your most important magical tool, your mind. Master divination through cartomancy, dreams, pendulums and more. With tarot and folk Italian magic expert D. Norman as your guide, build your magical toolkit and discover one of humanity's longest lasting traditions for good fortune, a happy home and self-care. Okay, so the main reason that I sort of wanted to read this book was the Italian aspect of it, because I'm always interested to learn more about Italian folk magic and sort of the history of Italian witchcraft and things like that. And there are not many books at all with that topic or with information about that. So basically, if you're not familiar with any of my other videos, then I do tend to go on a bit about the fact that I have Italian heritage or Italian ancestry. So it was my great grandfather that was originally Italian, that lived in Italy and moved or emigrated to the UK, to Bristol. So I will explain a little bit more about that later on, but I just wanted to give a little bit of an idea as to why this particular book was one that interested me. Okay, so let's move on to some of my thoughts about this book. So the book starts with a very quick introduction about the author, so Dee's upbringing and her family life. She obviously has Italian heritage, and she does discuss that and her relationship with magic. And I think it's really good to have that context because, as I said, the book is subtitled An Italian-American Grimoire. So having that information about Dee's upbringing, about her background in terms of her magic is important for the rest of the book. I think it's also important as well that Dee mentioned her family's magic was entwined with some Catholic beliefs, which obviously being in Italy is quite popular. It includes things like the saints and other Catholic symbolism, And it does seem that Catholicism and Italian folk magic are inextricably linked, and it is something that I've come across before as well in another book that I read. So when I read and reviewed the book of Practical Magic by Pamela Ball, I did come across this idea of the saints as well, and it does seem that there is some links sort of throughout witchcraft and witchcraft history between Catholicism and magic. It is something that I do want to learn more about and to explore. It's just not something that I think I'm ready to incorporate and to use in my own craft at the moment. And Dee in the book does acknowledge that. She does say that she felt it was important to include those aspects of her practice, so things like working with the saints, but yet it can be skipped. So if it's not something that you're comfortable with, if it's not something that you're used to working with, or it's not something that you want to include in your craft, then that is something that you can just skip past. So as I mentioned, the reason that I wanted to read this book was because I wanted to learn more about Italian folk magic, because it is part of my ancestry and my heritage. And unfortunately, I'm sort of not able to explore that through my own family, because my grandmother, sort of on my mother's side, she passed away a few years ago now, and I was never really close to her. She didn't really live near us, and we never really had a relationship. So unfortunately, it was not something that I could explore through her. So that's why I do love reading about it and everything, and just learning about other people's practices, and just getting as much knowledge as I can about that aspect as well. So I did find it really interesting as well in the beginning when Dee explained a little bit about Italy's history and the immigration of Italians to America. So as I said, it's Italian-American Grimoire, and it's interesting to me because those early stages of sort of that Italian history that Dee mentions is when my great-great-granddad would have been immigrating to England. So even though she's obviously talking about the immigration from Italy to America, it still sort of fits as well in that it's about that time that he would have been coming over to the UK. So he moved from, I did find this out because obviously I've done some history, looking at my history and things through Ancestry and whatnot, and he did move from Livorno in Tuscany in Italy to Bristol in the UK. And I just thought that it was really interesting to have that information about the history of Italy and sort of why people were immigrating and moving to other countries as well. And it's really, really great to have that context when reading a book like this. In terms of the book in general then, it is really, really well organised with lots of sections and headings. Each chapter does offer a little bit of theory first about how and why things are done or practiced in a certain way. So sort of exploring that Italian-American tradition. And then after that, there is a more practical side with clear instructions on how you can carry out your own spells and rituals following that tradition. I think the book is really good for beginners in witchcraft and folk magic, as it does cover some of the basics in terms of the magical toolkit section, so things like the candle colours and herbal correspondences. However, the book is also really good for seasoned witches or folk magic practitioners, especially if you are wanting to learn more about that sort of Italian specific correspondences and beliefs. So for example, there was a little section about working your magic and making sure you're in the right headspace to cast those spells, and Dee calls this attention, focus, concentration. So she split it into 3 ways that they work, or that they get themselves in the right frame of mind in order to cast their magic. I won't explain exactly how it works because obviously you'll need to read the book for that. But it is something that I really appreciated because it was simple and it's magic that you work yourself, which is often the best. Similarly, there was also a really interesting section about dream work and how we have personal symbols that show up in our dreams that are specific and personal to us, and it's about working out what those symbols are and just being aware of them. So learning to understand them and interpret them. And it did definitely intrigue me because I do a little bit of dream work myself, although I have become a little bit lax recently with that. I've not really been keeping up with it. And this was definitely some really good encouragement that I needed to get back into that, because I really was interested in exploring my personal dream symbols. A lot of witchy books, especially beginner ones, do talk about altars and how to create an altar. So Dee did include some really lovely ideas for small and simple altars to incorporate that magic into your home. She sort of presents it like purposefully decorating or organising small pockets of magic around your home. One was creating an altar in a plant pot with some crystals and other things as well. And it really inspired me to create something along those lines. So I've got a little sort of glass pot with air plants in, and I've sort of felt inspired to create something from that. So I've incorporated some spell jars, some crystals, my pendulums as well. So it's sort of now, I see it as a charging altar as well for my pendulums. So it was just really inspiring things, and thinking of things that you probably wouldn't have thought about before, and giving you some new ideas for your craft as well. In terms of altars as well, I also really loved the idea of the bookshelf altar that she shared, because that's literally what my altar has always been. So actually my altar originally started as just this shelf, and all the bottom part of it was the bookshelf, and then I would have my altar on the top. And books obviously are one of the biggest aspects of my crafts, so this whole space now has become my altar, and I mix everything together, so it's not sort of like separated. So I don't have the books, the altar, it's sort of all incorporated. So I mix everything together on the bookshelves. So I have my spell jars, I have books, I have the lights, I have candles, my cauldron. Towards the bottom as well, I have all my herbs and things for when I'm doing my herbal magic and casting my spells. So I really did love that idea that she mentioned about creating your altars everywhere and having these little pockets of magic. And it just sort of, what's the word? I suppose it just sort of acknowledged and made me feel better about what I'd done with my space, in that I didn't have sort of just one altar. I have sort of these pockets everywhere, I suppose. So there were some really lovely ideas about how to create that magic and that space within your home. As I did mention at the beginning, the book does explore working with saints, and as I said, this is not something that particularly interests me at the moment. It's not something that I find myself wanting to add to my practice, yet I do understand why Italian witches and folk magic practitioners do choose to include saints within their craft. So even if they don't actually consider themselves Catholic, it is part of sort of their heritage, their culture. So Dee does explain her reasoning behind including the saints in her craft, and she does this really well. But on the other side to that, she does explain that if working with saints is not something that works for you, then that is completely fine. So it's just good to have that information, I suppose. The most interesting chapter for me throughout the whole book was about the Malocchio, or the evil eye. And also the following chapter, which was about protection. So I've always had a fascination with the evil eye and sort of the history and the folk beliefs surrounding that. I did already know a lot about it before I read this chapter, but I do enjoy, like I said, reading more different ideas and different folk beliefs about it. So Dee explains it very clearly. She explains what it is, how it works, how to detect it, and also how to cure it as well, which some books that I've read about just completely ignore that. They just explain what it is, but then they don't tell you sort of how to work out if you've got it, how to get rid of it as well. So it's all very practical in the way that she explains it. It's not over the top, it's not extreme, as some people can tend to be when talking about the Malocchio, but I just really appreciated her take on it, and the way that she explained it as well. Again, as I mentioned, the chapter after that was about protection and protection spells, and they were very simple, yet they were enshrined in that Italian history and that folk magic. The use of items for protection such as the black candle, salt and basil are all explained in detail, and usually with a personal anecdote attached as well, which was really nice. I thought I would mention a couple of things that I didn't really connect with myself or as much. So towards the end of the book, Dee explores some of the Italian celebrations, and how her family would usually honour or celebrate specific times of year. So these were very much specific to her and her family, and I did enjoy reading them, yet they weren't something that I felt a connection with. Also, there was a chapter on good fortune, so good and bad luck, which didn't really work for me. I would call them more superstitions, or that's how I see them. So the things that she talked about, I would see them more as superstitions, and a lot of which I was already familiar with. I guess I just didn't really have an interest in those. There was one that I was a little bit sort of confused by, I suppose. It didn't really sit right with me, so I'm just going to share that one with you because I'd appreciate your take on it as well. So it was this one. I don't know if you can see it there, but it says it's bragging will bring trouble your way. So it's basically this idea that bragging about things, about your life, about promotions, just general sort of bragging, I suppose, about things and how that's going to bring you trouble, which is fine. Again, it's like a superstition, I suppose, and I've never been somebody that would brag about something in that way, but I think it's just the next bit that came with that. So it says, so for example, you've got a promotion and maybe a friend or a neighbour or somebody says to you, oh, congratulations on that promotion. Then it's sort of saying that you can't say, oh, thank you very much, and, you know, have a little bit of a brag, I suppose, about the fact that you've been promoted. Instead, you have to be quite self-deprecating in that you would say, oh yes, but actually it's doubled my workload. So seeing it as or talking about it in a negative way, I suppose, and not being able to accept that something good has happened. Sort of, if you've got a new job or you've got a promotion, it feels like it's maybe not being able to enjoy that success, which for me, like I said, I've never been one that's for bragging. I've always been quite self-deprecating, and when I've had sort of, I don't know if I necessarily would call it therapy, but things for like mental health and confidence, is being able to accept a compliment and say, oh yes, thank you very much, I really appreciate that, I've done really well, and acknowledge how well you've done at something. And I feel like this one was taking away from that, I suppose, and making you be more self-deprecating, and it just didn't sit right with me, I suppose. Maybe, like I said, it could be an Italian thing, it's an Italian superstition, it's a superstition that people believe in, that if they sort of openly brag about something that they've accomplished, then maybe they will get some bad luck in return. It is sort of one of those things of whether you believe it or not, but for me, that was just something that didn't sit right. I am trying to be a little bit more confident and happy and celebratory, I suppose, of my successes, shall we say, but not in a braggy way, I hope. Anyway, but I suppose it's about finding a balance, isn't it? But let me know. I've probably waffled a little bit there about that and not explained it very well. But if you are Italian, or if this particular superstition or idea about good luck and good fortune is something that's part of your family or something that you believe in, then maybe you could explain it to me a little bit more so that I've got a little bit more understanding of it. Okay, but those were sort of the only couple of things that sort of didn't sit right with me in the book. Okay, time for some final thoughts about this book then. So one of my absolute favourite things about this book then was the personal nature of it. I always love a witchy book that is personal and that draws on and relates to the author's life and their personal practice, and this book is genuinely personal, and Dee shares so much of herself and her family with the reader. It just feels very authentic to read about the craft, and especially folk magic in this way as well. So I just love a book that has that personal aspect of it. I was very curious as to why Dee and the publishers, or a combination of both of those, had decided to go with the title Burn a Black Candle. And obviously further into the book we find out that candle magic and the spells and the rituals that are incorporated in Italian folk magic do involve a lot of burning of a black candle. I do have a lot of black candles, like small, sort of those little tapered candles, which I do use regularly in my magic, especially for protection spells. But this book did inspire me to go out and to get some bigger black candles to burn a lot more regularly. So for example, I have one here, a little, it's little, but it's bigger than the ones that I was burning before, so that I can have those there, that, like I said, can be burning those regularly. And the magic within the book surrounding the burning of black candles was just really easy, and I loved the simplicity of it as well. And it's just a really simple and easy way for me to build in that Italian folk magic into my practice and have that connection with my ancestors, I suppose, and that's something that I really enjoyed about it. So even though the subtitle of the book refers to an Italian American grimoire, I see it more as exploring the Italian folklore, the Italian magic, mixed with the personal anecdotes from Dee's family's beliefs, and she is obviously American as well. So even though it has that Italian American side, I still felt quite a strong connection with everything that was in the book, because I wanted to connect with that Italian side of myself. So don't feel like you have to be Italian American at all in order to read this book. I really did enjoy the book just for the simplicity of the magic that's in it. It's a reminder that your craft doesn't have to be extreme and overly complicated in order to get results. And I am excited now to start incorporating a lot of the ideas into my own craft and to connect with my Italian heritage. Okay, that's it for today's review then, guys. I would genuinely recommend this book. I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I will frequently come back to it. Just a reminder that it comes out on the 13th of September. Let me know if it's something that you think you want to delve into. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next video.